I remember our flight was really long. Thankfully, like, you get to fly Lufthansa, which is like the best airline ever. So we flew Lufthansa. They give you like more food than you could ever want, like more to drink. So the flight wasn't bad over there. I actually remember being in the Vienna airport waiting for our last flight, and it kind of sunk in like, oh, I'm actually going to Ukraine now. And then apparently our flight got delayed because there's like a snowstorm, and our flight got delayed, and we were like taxiing in Vienna and about to take off, and I had like fallen asleep before we even took off, and then I woke up again right as we were taking off. And so our flight was delayed for 2 hours, and I didn't find out that our flight had been delayed until like 6 months after I was already there, because I had I fell asleep, and I sat asleep for 2 hours because I was just like so jet lagged and tired. And then we just like started moving again. So it was like we were moving when we dozed off, we were moving and getting ready to take off when I woke up, and then we flew. And so I didn't know that our flight was late by 2 hours, and we had sat there for 2 hours doing nothing. But then I remember we landed. My mission president and his wife and the assistants picked us up at the airport. And the airport's kind of weird. Like, you fly in and you get off the plane and you get on this bus, and then the bus like goes and just does a U-turn. And then the bus does a U-turn, and then you get off and you get inside the airport. So it's kind of a weird setup, and I thought that was weird. But then I remember just looking around, and I was like, oh, this is it. And I remember as soon as I landed, it just kind of felt like home. Like, I knew like this is where I'm supposed to be. So I went in and we met the assistants, got our luggage, we put it in the mission van, and they took it all back for us. And then we went out and went contacting. We were out with the assistants, and the first person who we talked to, we were like they have these shuttle buses called Marshrutki that it's a public bus service, and they follow routes. So they have a number on it, and they follow routes throughout the city, but it's instead of like a big bus that comes every half hour, like they'll come like every 2 or 3 minutes, and it looks like a shuttle. And so you kind of hop on, everyone piles on, and then once it's full, it goes. And then like the next bus comes, and if you see one coming down the street that you want, you just kind of wave it down, and it'll pull over and pick you up, and you can hop on. And so we got on the Marshutka, and we started talking to somebody. Like, we were speaking English, and so this guy turned around and started talking to us, and the assistant who we were with was like talking back to him, because it was me and one other elder who was in my group who came in with me. And so the assistant was talking to them, and we had no idea what this guy was saying, and we kind of just thought, oh man, what did we get ourselves into? And then so we were sitting there, and I remember turning to the assistant, and I said, I'm pretty sure that's not like, are you sure they taught us like the right language in the MTC? Like, what's going on here? And so it actually ended up that in the city where that was the only time I ever heard anybody speak Ukrainian in that city, my entire mission, was the first person I talked to in Ukraine. And so I was just like kind of scared. And then I just remember went out and we went contacting, and we kind of tried talking to people. It was a real struggle. I think in most missions you kind of do that. You get off the plane and they just kind of throw you right in to it. And just walking around and looking at all the buildings and looking at the people, and I noticed that like they dress differently, and the buildings, like the architecture was different, and even like it smelled different. There were all these signs for food that I'd never seen before, and it was like being in a whole new world. And then after we contacted for a while, we went back, and they let us like take like a nap for a little bit, because we were all exhausted and just like dozing off even when we were riding public transport. And then we went to one of the branch buildings, like the main branch building in the city, and the branch had organized like a culture night, like a welcome party for the new missionaries. And so they had us all get up and introduce ourselves and talk to us, and then they had a whole feast of like traditional foods and things, and then singing and dancing, and it was very like, it was awesome to see so much support from the members and how excited they were that new missionaries were there. And it kind of made me take for granted like how I treated missionaries growing up, because it was like, oh, it's the missionaries, whatever. But you could see like how excited they were, and just to have people there and to see like, to see the look on their faces as they got to talk to everyone, and they're like, oh, like, don't worry, you'll be able to speak and understand in no time. And then after the little performance thing, we went in to eat the food, and they played a trick on us. And so one of very traditional Ukrainian food is sala, and it's like just pork fat. And so it's like, basically, if you think of like a strip of bacon, it's like just the white fat that's on bacon. Like, they don't eat the meat, they just eat the fat. And so normally it's very thin sliced, and you just put a little bit on some bread and eat it, and it's not bad. But they had huge chunks, and they told us like, oh, it's, a Ukrainian tradition that when you go to someone's guest house, you have to like offer them this because it's like an expensive delicacy. So you have to offer them this food, and you have to like eat it to start your meal. And so I remember eating it, and I like could barely, I don't even remember if I swallowed. I may have like put my head down and like spit it out. I don't remember, because it was just disgusting. It was this huge chunk. And then as soon as we all did it, and they like took pictures, like the look on our face of how nasty it was, then they all started laughing and told us that they played a joke on us. But then I just remember all of the food that they gave us. Like, it was the first time I'd ever eaten borscht, and it was very good. And just like that different melons, I don't even know what it is. They had these weird melons that kind of taste like a cross between a pear and a cantaloupe. That is the first time I'd ever seen. I've never seen them in the US, so I don't even know what they're called. And they're like just all these different fruits and vegetables, and it was very like fresh food that was really good. And then the juice, I think you'll hear that from like pretty much any missionary served in Eastern Europe, that just the juice is extremely, extremely good. And just I don't know, I probably had like half a gallon of juice, because it's just like, oh, I want to try this one, I want to try this one, I want to try this one. And then after that, like, we just went home, and it was only like 8 o'clock or 8:30, and we were just like out and just completely just slept through like the entire night. I would say do as much learning about the culture as you can. I know it's kind of hard not being outside of the culture, and but one thing I wish I would have done is I didn't know how much Russian, Ukrainian culture are very similar, and it's the same in both of them. I guess I didn't almost say like Soviet culture, is how much they respect literature and like learning. And like, it's very disrespectful even like to put a book on the ground, because that's like, if the book gets dirty and anything gets on the book, then that's, showing disrespect to like knowledge and disrespecting whose ideas those were or whatever. And so they love and praise like authors, like heroes like Pushkin and Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and Chekhov are all great authors that are, I don't know, their works are like almost like scripture. Like in school, everyone has to memorize poems and do poetry recitations. And I think, and a lot of them, especially Dostoevsky, had a very spiritual influence in their writing, like in their poetry and in their novels. So, reading the words of great Russian poets really helps, at least has helped me since I've been home and I've studied them, to kind of see, an insight in the culture, and where like, as they read those, kind of how they think, and breaking down that culture better. Not only that, but, as it would have been great at the time if I had known, like had quotes from Russian poetry or things to compare, like make gospel comparisons from, to be able to really speak and teach to the people, using words that they've studied their whole lives and are very familiar with. And I think other than that, just being ready to work and learning how to work, and training, whether making sure that you're living a balanced life before you go to the MTC, that like you're physically fit, because it is physically demanding to walk, 5, 10, 15 miles a day, trying to find people to teach or getting to your appointments, as well as, the mental capacity of studying for 3 hours straight every morning. That was something I'd never done before. So I think just making sure that I had a balanced life and was trying to prepare myself in as many different areas as possible, and being able to just have the, I don't know if grit's the right word, but to have like the grit and the fortitude to just like, hey, I know this is what I'm supposed to do, and so I'm going to do it, and I'm not going to, just making that decision that I'm not going to stop, like, or let anything distract me, or let anything kind of knock me down or get me down and out on myself when obstacles come up. And just knowing like that there is a reason that you're supposed to be there, and just kind of holding on to that even when things don't seem like they're going all that great. pre-mission, everybody wants to like get a leg up and get a leg up on the language, but I think there's so many other important things you can do. Like if you work hard, like I spent a lot of time trying to study the language thinking I'd get a head start, but when I got into the MTC, everything I'd spent the 5 months before I went into the MTC was covered in a week. So I realized that I could have, had I been studying the scriptures and really trying to understand the doctrine and being able to practice and really know the doctrine that I was going to be teaching, well, know it in a simplified way that I could present it to people. Because I think when you read Preach My Gospel, it's everything that you're supposed to teach people because it's very, very basic doctrine, but just being able to explain it in a way and thinking of, this is interesting. How do I want to explain the fall to people? The fall of Adam and Eve? How do I want to explain the importance of the restoration to people? And being able to understand that in English first, rather than spending my time learning the language, because everything I did we covered in like the first week, and it was like, oh, I could have done so much more reading the scriptures rather than, instead of spending an hour a day studying Russian, I could have been reading my scriptures for an extra hour a day and gotten a lot more understanding gospel-wise before I went in. Well, I think everyone associates Russia with borscht, but borscht is actually a Ukrainian food. So borscht is like beet soup. You think I first thought about that, I was like, oh, it's just like beets, like whatever. But really, beets are a very, very small part of it. It's red because of the beets. Like when you boil beets, they lose their color, and so they dye everything red, and so the soup itself is red. But it's kind of just a plain old vegetable soup. Like there's cabbage and carrots and onions and potatoes, some kind of meat, seasoning. It's usually parsley and dill they put fresh parsley and fresh dill on everything, and beets, and you boil it all together, and that's borscht. Originally it kind of came from saving and it's like when you're chopping vegetables and you get down to that last little awkward piece, that's kind of whatever, that they would just throw it into a pot all winter to save it, and then as when food kind of ran out towards the end of the winter, they would have this pot all saved up of all the vegetables that they would eat, and then they would boil that, and then that was borscht. But so they eat borscht a lot. They fairly healthy. They're very eat a lot of fresh produce, and you're going to farmers markets or going out and you go to the Renick or the market, and there's just produce, boxes and boxes of all this produce laid out, and it's really good. You kind of go and you talk to them and you just buy what you need. And so they eat a lot of produce, a lot of fruits and vegetables. And I'm trying to think of other dishes. Holodets is like a meat jello that most people will not be too fond of. Even younger generation, younger Ukrainians aren't super fond of it. It's very salty and just has a weird texture because it's made from it's basically like a meat fat jello thing. But it's that, and then plov is very popular. It's a rice dish. It's just rice and pork and onions and carrots and then different spices. People eat vareniki, which are stuffed dumplings. So they'll be and usually they'll be filled with either cabbage or mashed potatoes and then boiled, or some people do fry them, or you can get dessert ones that will have cherry pie filling kind of in them. There's also pelmeni, which are the same thing, but they're raviolis that are filled with meat. Another popular thing is sharma, which is even depending on which part. In Ukraine, they'll call them sharma. Some places in Russian call them shawarma. So it really depends on where you're at, and even it's like a kebab, so it's kind of like a burrito with meat and cabbage and carrots and French fries and sauce. Just potatoes, but they usually use French fries. So those will be the stand on the side of the road that you'll get food from. Like I said, sala, just the bacon fat, which actually grows on you. A lot of people will drink kvass, which is a non-alcoholic fermented bread drink. So it's kind of a non-alcoholic beer in a way. But that also grows on you. It's really strong and just disgusting at first, but now I don't mind drinking it at all. I think it's good. And then just the candies, like you'll go into a candy shop, and there'll be different kind of cakes and baked goods and different sweet things and different, just all sorts of different kinds of chocolates with different fillings. And mostly everything has sweet and condensed milk. So you see is gushonka on everything, and like it's put on everything. And then blinchiki, which are like crepes. So they'll eat crepes a lot. There are Russian stores in pretty much every major city in the U.S. Like I know there's 2 in Salt Lake, here the nearby, and you can find things online. So if you go to a Russian store, especially get bread, fresh bread is delicious. I'd buy, like one of my areas, I lived above a bakery, and so we'd like buy fresh bread every day from the lady. Run down in the morning and buy a fresh loaf of bread, like when it's coming hot out of the oven. And then we get pirishki, which are like stuffed scones. So like dough that's stuffed with either like cabbage or baked potato or mashed potatoes, and then fried. So it's like a normal scone, like a fry bread, but stuffed. And so even if you go to like find a store, you can find a lot of things to kind of try it out before you go, especially different candies and desserts and things. So there are 4 missions in Ukraine, if you kind of like split the country into quarters vertically. So there's, with the current political events, there's currently only 3. But so the 4 missions in Ukraine: Lviv, Kyiv, Dnepropetrovsk, and Donetsk. There's only the Lviv mission, which is on the furthest western portion of the country, bordering Poland, is the only one that has Ukrainian-speaking missionaries. And the other 3 missions, everyone is called Russian-speaking. So I didn't even hear any Ukrainian or at all till my last area, which was further up north in Poltava. It was the closest city in our mission to Kyiv, and that was the only area where I ever heard any Ukrainian. So there is a temple. The church is growing. If you look at, so the first missionaries got there in end of 1990, very beginning of 1991. Can't remember exactly where. And they had originally come from they're part of a different mission. There was no mission there, and then they sent in a few missionaries. The first missionary was actually there. He was Russian Ukrainian by birth, but he'd grown up in Australia, and so that's where his family joined the church. And so he was colony sent back, and so they had nothing. There was no branch, there was no anything. They were just like them. They put them in the capital. And so if you look at from where they were, if you look at the growth of the church in the first 20 years, from first missionaries touching down to 20 years later, Ukraine and Russia, the Eastern Europe area, is actually the fastest growing. At least in time, that's one thing they told us, that it was the fastest growing area in the world. So from where they were with from 0 to the first 20 years, it's more than the Philippines or Brazil or South America, which is kind of amazing to me because I see where all those places are now, but still see how, when you go to church and there's 15 people there in this little branch, how young the church still is. But there is a temple there. The temple was announced in 1998, but it wasn't, because of legal things and working with the government, it wasn't actually finished being built in 2010. And so I was in the MTC during the temple dedication, and on my way home from my mission, I was able to spend a day in the capital and to spend a day at the temple. But there's a temple there. It's one of the most heavy used temples in the world. So it's pretty much every session is full, and it's always, I'm amazed at the sacrifices that people make and how often they try to go to the temple. But in the country itself, there's only one stake in the capital. And even in the Dnepropetrovsk Mission, when I was serving there, there was a district, which is a smaller stake made up of only branches. But they hadn't, then after I'd been out for about a year, they dissolved the district to try to put more of the leadership in the branches to help them out. And so everything is just under the mission president. So he's kind of has to act as the mission president and the stake president. But so the church is still very, very young, and there's a lot of, I served in a branch presidency And it's, kind of the point now where it's getting, now that there's a lot more people who have gone on missions, who are coming back from their missions, who are, native members, native to Ukraine and Russia. There's a lot more strength and, people having just a lot more experience, because there's actually people who have, were baptized when they were 4, or their families were baptized when they were 4 or 5, and they got baptized when they were 8, or they were even born in the church. And now that they've been born in the church and have actually grown up around the church, there's starting to be this whole new generation of people who've grown up and seen how the church runs, instead of, there's, I know my first area, the branch president was made the branch president less than 6 months after he was baptized. He was the branch president, and then he served as the branch president for a decade. And so it's, going from that, where it's these people who haven't grown, and I think you kind of underestimate how much you see just how the church works, just growing up and hearing about your parents going to different meetings, and you have to seeing different things, working on different councils and organizationally, to, oh, here's this council of people who are trying to run a branch or trying to organize these things, and they have only been there for, they've been a member for 2 months, and now they're trying to take on this huge thing. It made me very appreciative and kind of gave me understanding into church history, and, how the early saints, how they're just kind of trying to figure it out as they go and try to see, okay, that didn't work, let's try this. Okay, this works. This is a good activity that people respond to. We'll try doing that, and just trying to, trying to really flying by the seat of your pants to figure out how things should be done. Ukrainian and Russian culture are very, very, very similar. I mean, there's a few foods that Ukrainians eat more of than Russians, but they grow up watching the same cartoons, they read the same authors, they're very, it's pretty similar, especially Eastern Ukraine. The further east you travel in Ukraine, the more Russian it becomes. And so there's people, on my mission, there'd be people, when you're talking to people on the street and buying something, they would tell you the price, and they would say 2 rubles instead of 2 hryvnia, because they 2 hryvnias, because they would, even just say, using the Russian word for the Russian currency, just because they're very Russian. So it's culturally, they are almost identical in many ways. So it's, whether it's you're going to Ukraine or Russia or Belarus, you're gonna pretty much run into the same things and find the same culture. And I think that's pretty general across many Soviet countries, just since they were one country for so long, that it kind of, just the way of doing things kind of bled. And they, as in the Soviet Union, many foods from the other native people kind of became popular, plov, which is a rice dish from Uzbekistan, is very popular throughout all of Russia and Ukraine now, just because when Uzbekistan, as it was part of the Soviet Union, it kind of spread. So it's kind of, I think there's more of a Soviet culture, so more so than a specific Russian or Ukrainian culture, and they've all kind of influenced each other. So you'll find a lot of buildings, it's almost if you see an aerial view, it looks just a bunch of Legos or something. It's very, on a block you'll have 4 buildings, so one on each side of the block, and then in the middle will be a playground or a soccer field or something. So it's kind of the backyard for all the people who are living in those apartments. And instead of an apartment complex here where you go up and there's a balcony with hallways or whatever, it's, you'll have a building along a street, and then there'll be 4 or 5, or even some longer, some shorter, kind of entrances to a stairwell. And then you'll go up and there'll be 3 or 4 apartments on each floor in the thing, and then there'll be the next stairwell over in the building, and so it kind of works over. And so that's each one of those is called a podъезд. And so you'll see a lot of the buildings where they just look exactly the same. So it's can be kind of tricky to get oriented at first if you're just kind of lost, because it's hard to have a landmarker, because in some areas, because it's just so many buildings that all look exactly the same, because they were just built and just to try to house as many people as possible. But when you wake up, most people work 6 or 7 days a week. Can be really hard, because Monday is kind of the day that people usually have off. And so it's pretty much most people work on Sundays. So it can be kind of hard that dealing with church and getting people to church and people finding time to come to church. Most people use public transportation or walk. So there's a lot of people are very slender just because they walk so much. And it's, like you go out and you catch a shuttle bus that's going, or there'll be like a trolley. In a lot of bigger cities, there'll be a trolley that you hop on and it just like goes around the tracks kind of. And so you can just take either one of those and you just go to wherever will get you closest to where you need to go, and then you hop off. And it's usually not very expensive. You pay for like per ride, so it doesn't matter how far you go. Like you can ride it all the way around the entire time if you want to like ride the thing the entire time. So sometimes actually in like the winter we would just get on the trolley bus, not a trolley bus, a trolley car. It's called a tramway. And my parents would go and just to talk to people, because if it was really cold outside, then people wouldn't want to talk about the cars are heated. And so you could go inside and just sit down next to people and talk to them and try to find people to teach that way. And people get up and go to work and they come home, and people don't like letting strangers in late at night. So it's like, 7 o'clock, whatever. There's after 7, if you're trying to go tracting, it's late. It's too late at night. People won't let you in a lot of times. And that's everybody. Pretty much everyone has a dacha, which is like a cottage outside the city, and they'll have like a little garden. And so it's, especially in the summer months, they like to spend the weekends on the dacha and go out, and usually there's like on a river or a lake or something. So they'll go swimming and kind of play and just kind of get out and go camping kind of in their cabin, in the cottage house, outside of the city. And that's kind of like their getaway to kind of get away from the hustle and bustle of the city. And they're very health conscious. So it's get away and, where there's cleaner air and cleaner water and everything, and grow their own fruits and vegetables. So it's healthier kind of thing. The weather, you get 4 real seasons. Like you get a definitive like spring, summer, fall, winter. So nice. And you'll go from 9,500 degrees in the summer to -30, -35 degrees in the winter, depending on where you're at. And it's if you buy coats and bundle up, it's not too bad in the winter. I don't mind cold weather, but it gets hot. It gets really hot in the summer, like really hot, and it's really humid. But it's very doable, but I really enjoyed. I liked having like 4 distinct seasons. It was kind of the first place I'd ever lived that really had those. Crime and safety, we never really ran into any issues with anything. It's kind of, you won't have any issues as long as you're smart about what you do. Like if you notice a group of people who are noticeably drunk walking down the street, you should avoid talking to them or whatever. So it's, just kind of using common sense and listening to the spirit of to decide like, oh, maybe just avoid talking to those people, or like, let's cross the street so we can, because there potentially something may happen. But I never, ran into any issues with anything. So if you just got your call, be excited. You're going to the best mission in the world. And that doesn't matter what mission you're going to. It's because, every mission there's a reason you're being sent there. And that reason, whatever that is, it will change your life. And everything that you look back on your life, you'll see things as the time period before you'll have 3 periods in your life: before my mission, and after my mission. And, those 2 years will be very valuable in every situation I've come across in my life since I've been home. Every problem I've had, everything that's been hard, I look back and I've learned a lesson, and can gain more from the experience that I had. And it was the greatest life training that I think I could have ever had. The people are amazing. The food may seem strange at first, but if you allow yourself to be open to a new world and to new people, you'll find that you don't just spend 2 years going through your mission, but that it will really change you inside and out as a person. And if you seek to understand their culture and find things, and basically if you have the attitude that things are not better or worse, they're just different, and look at everything with that through that lens, that I can learn from these people just as I'm here to teach them, but I can learn so much from them, then you will get so much more out of it. And just go and work hard and know that you're there for a reason, and find that reason and use that as, kind of your candle in the dark when things are tough. Russia and Ukraine have always had a long relationship. Even like Ukraine was part of the Russian Empire, and it's kind of gone back and forth. Like in the last 500 years, pretty much Ukraine has been attacked and been controlled by like every single one of its neighbors. Like it was part of the Polish Empire, it was part of the Lithuanian Empire, it was part of the Russian Empire. And then spurts of it being a free country in between all of those things. And so it's always kind of been the show where it's very close and intermingled because they are Eastern Slavs, just like the Russians and the Belarusians and Belarus. And so they've always had a very close relationship. And I mean, just like any political thing, there's people who are for what's going on and think it's a good change. There's people who are against it. But at least, I recently returned. I spent the entire summer in Moscow. So I was in Russia, and I didn't feel any political tensions there as an American. I went to the Crimea this summer. And for all I know, I may have been the only American in the entire peninsula at the time. I don't know. But because... and there were even though that had just switched and they'd, just switched over from using the hryvnia, which is the Ukrainian currency, to the ruble, which is the Russian currency, and all those things, and transitioning from being a part of Ukraine to being part of Russia, there wasn't any political tension there as well. So it's in the day-to-day life for many people, things haven't really changed. For others, they've really been struggling a lot and really suffering. Like I have some friends who, they weren't able to talk to their family for like 6 months because they were completely cut off, or they, were sitting in their apartment and their building got shot up, kind of thing. And so it is a very real thing. Like all political things, people have different opinions on it, whether it's good, whether it's bad. But the members of the church have been very, very good about not worrying about who's right and who's wrong, but just really taking people in and taking, members who are fleeing as refugees from the war zone to, take them in and make sure that everyone is taken care of and helping people. So it's really focusing just on the safety of the people rather than, who's right and who's wrong, and just that'll eventually sort itself out one way or the other. But I think it's really hard without being there to even really know what's going on. Just because I think, with, news outlets kind of spin things the way they want it to be said. So if you watch the Russian news or the Ukrainian news and the American news, you'll get 3 very different stories. And so I think it's really hard to know what's actually kind of really the truth of what's going on. So the Ukrainian people are they're very, very loyal, very always kind of looking out to take care of everybody around them, especially their family and friends. So one family that especially sticks out to me is the Shunkin family. I met them in my last area, but they were famous, not even just throughout our mission, but throughout the entire country amongst members of the church. So they had originally seen missionaries and seen their name tag and saw that said elder, and he thought, wow, this is really weird. How they're only 20 years old. How could they be an elder in whatever church they're? That's kind of strange. But the missionaries were speaking to each other in English, so he thought that they didn't speak Russian, and so he wanted to talk to them, but he didn't think that they would understand him. So, and then later he met them again, and he talked to him, and he and his wife were baptized in the early 90s. They were some of the first members to join the church in Donetsk. They were in a big city. And then after that, they moved to a small village outside of Poltava. So it was about an hour away from Poltava. And at the time, there was no branch there, and they were the only members there. And so they would get up, and to go to church on Sundays, they would get up and leave their house around midnight, drive the hour and a half into the city from their village, get on a train, take their train to Kharkov, which is another city, and go from the train station to church. And after church, they would do it all backwards, and they'd get home at 10:30, 11, midnight. Get home late at night. So it was almost a 24-hour trip for them to go to church. And after they did that, they were doing that, but they've always been so great about sharing the gospel with other people. And basically, because of them, there is a branch like now in Poltava. And not only is there a branch in the city, but it's one of the strongest branches in the mission. And there's, like 20 or 25 people who have joined the church as referrals from them, who they've brought to the church. And they are the most self-sufficient people I've ever met in my life. He built their house himself, and they live on this land, and they grow everything, even like they grow their own wheat that they grind into flour to make their own bread. And so they do all this themselves, and they take what they need, and then they'll show up to church with huge burlap sacks full of food. Say, whoever needs any in the church, like else in the ward, if you know anybody who needs food, like this is all the extra that we have. And so they're just so willing to give freely away. And when they come to church, they'll all pile in. Like all of the members in this village where they live will pile into their car. And I remember getting to church one Sunday, and I knew that a bunch of people drove in, but they opened the car doors and people just started piling out. And I didn't realize that many people rode with them. And then they went and opened the trunk, and someone had ridden to church in the trunk. And so that's just how, just kind of how dedicated they were to helping other people. And I remember just their humility and dedication to the gospel and serving and finding ways to help other people. It blew my mind. And then when I think of, like who I want to become, like when I grow up, it's, I think of, Vladimir Shunkin, and I was like a man, like someone who I want to emulate. And I also think of I had the opportunity to serve in a branch as a counselor in a branch presidency. And his family, they had just moved there from Russia. His name is Denis Nozhnikov, and just the way, how dedicated they were to sharing the gospel. And we would take a taxi someplace, and every time he took a taxi, he would always give out a pass-along card or talk to him or invite people to English practice. Like he would get in a taxi and he would say, "Hey, like, do you have any kids?" Just make small talk or whatever. And he said, "Oh," and then these drivers like, "Yeah, I have some kids." Like, "Oh, well, like my friends, like they're Americans, they're here serving as volunteers, and they teach a free English class, so you guys can come." And so we'd always have people consistently coming, and they're like, "Oh, some guy like invited us here. Like my dad's a taxi driver, and he invited us and said we could come get free English practice." And so we'd find so many people just because he would always find ways to talk about the church or bring up things. And when they would ask him, people when he's working would ask him like, "Oh, where did you learn English?" And he would say, "Oh, like I studied in school, but then I served as a missionary for my church, and so I worked with a lot of Americans and was able to practice my English with them," or just finding creative ways to share the gospel with people. And just just how much and just how hard he worked to take care of and make sure every single person was taken care of in the branch, and how hard he worked to take care of his own, provide for his own family, not only that, but to share the gospel with people, and just the pure dedication to doing what he felt was right. And so when I think of like members, those are two of the people who stick out to me the most. And even just little things, just family serving, like there's the missionaries were loved by the members. Another family, the Davidenkos, I was in the office and he was our visa clerk, and and just how much people care about the missionaries and care for the missionaries and want to help the missionaries any way that they can. And just working with the members and how much help they wanted to give, and finding different ways. Or one thing my mom told me before I left, I don't even know if she remembers telling me this, but that I should never ever sew my own pants. Like if I get some new pants, never hem them myself. And she said, because there's somebody and there will be somebody who wants to help the missionaries but doesn't quite know how they can serve. They don't feel like they know anyone they can share the gospel with, but even if it's just an older lady in the branch who knows how to sew, that's her contribution. And that even happened a couple times where I would buy some new pants and have someone sew them for me, and they were so glad to help because they said like, "Oh, I love the missionaries, but I don't know what to do." And so I'm so grateful for the chance to be able to contribute to the work, even if it's just sewing your pants for you, or like hemming something or fixing something for you. So the members are always ready to help, and it's the people you'll meet will definitely. You are meeting them for a reason, and the places you go will be you'll be sent there for a reason. There's one family that I worked with in particular that I know and I have a very strong testimony that I was sent to talk to them for a reason, and it was a very unique situation, and my mission president talked to me when I received that assignment, and it was something that, working with that family, it truly did change my life and change how I see people, and how it changed my understanding of the atonement and how it can work and strengthen not only help us to repent, but can also how it can strengthen our families. And this summer when I went back and I surprised them, I showed up at their door at about 10 o'clock at night, and just how the relationships that we'll make on your mission, they'll never go away and they'll never change. And it's something that's when you have that spiritual foundation to a friendship, that it will never go away, and it will always make a lasting impression on you. Russian does use the Cyrillic alphabet, so there's 33 letters. There's kind of like 3 different groups. There's like the letters that sound the same, they look the same and sound the same as in English. There are letters that look like English letters but make a different sound, and then the letters that are completely different. So the Cyrillic alphabet is based, it's similar to the Greek alphabet, so it's kind of connected that way. And there's it's a very systematic language, so it's there's very few exceptions. It may seem like an exception, but once you dig into it, you see that everything follows a very specific pattern, and so it's very roots based. So towards the end of my mission, where you get to the point where you want to express an idea, but you don't quite know the word, and so then you'll know this root and this root and this prefix, and then put it all together to express the idea. And whether it's a real word or not, the idea gets across, and then you'll go look up in the dictionary and be like, oh yeah, that is a normal word, because it's all very root based, and so it's very systematic and very, very structured. And so at least I personally appreciate that, because it drives me nuts when there's oh, this is the rule except for this and this and this and this and this and this and this. And so there's so it's very systematic like that. It's very structured. Ukrainian and Russian are very similar languages, depending on where someone's at, and how familiar they are. They can be mutually intelligible, meaning that people can talk to one and they can understand each other. There's a little bit of a there's not too big of a dialectal difference between Russian in Russia and in Ukraine. The biggest one is the accent. So it's many Ukrainians don't pronounce G's as a G. They'll say pronounce as a H. So it's a guttural H. So that's something that Ukrainians will kind of stick out as, that way. It's if you're talking to someone who's Ukrainian versus a Russian, that the Ukrainian people will say ha. So instead of to talk, the verb to talk is gavarit, but they'll say havarit, and so things like that. So that will stick out. But other than that, there's it's pretty much the same thing. You'll hear little things here and there that they may say slightly different, but mostly it's the same language. Russian is the same language in Ukraine as it is. There's not too big of a dialectal difference. There's pretty much everybody in Ukraine understands Russian, so I think that's why they call the majority of missionaries Russian speaking, because whether they speak it as their native language a lot, the majority of the country is bilingual. But more so the people at least understand Russian, so you can communicate with them. But it's a very intricate language, and it's kind of fun. The word order doesn't matter. It's a case language, so that means that in addition to just conjugating a verb, you also have to decline, which is a conjugation, any adjectives and nouns as well. and so to match the verb or the preposition. And so it's the word order doesn't matter because of that. So you can put things in different order, and the closer something is to the end of the sentence, the more like emphasis it has on it. And so you can switch things around to kind of to emphasize what you want to, or to kind of, you can sometimes you'll say things like, I don't know, like I can't think of an example right now. But you can say things where it would seem the word order makes no sense in English, but it is like, it sounds better to say it in Russian. And so you have to match the cases. So there's 6 cases in Russian and 7 in Ukrainian. And so it's, I think, understanding the purpose of a case and kind of how it works. Like once you have that click in your head of why it's set up the way it is, then kind of everything really makes sense. And it's, I guess for an example, compare it to, it's like in English, we have like I and me are like the same word, like it's both referring to the same person, just it's like you talk to me, but I, like when it's the subject, it's I, and when it's not, it's me. And it's the same thing with like he and him, or she and her. So like those are cases. So it's like that, but it's for every noun and adjective you have to do that with to make it match.
What was the craziest food you had in Ukraine?
Borscht with muskrat meat. Muskrat is actually very delicious.
What is the craziest or most dangerous experience you've had in Ukraine?
Walking home late at night, and there's a creepy guy walking towards us and kind of started following us, and don't know who he was, but he did say some not very nice things, and so we kind of ran, and that was nothing too crazy.
What was the most important lesson you learned on your mission?
Everybody deserves our individual respect and care in looking at their situation. Doesn't matter if it's the same situation we've seen 100 times and we know that the same solution is going to be the same one. Everybody deserves our individual care to look at their situation to see what's the best solution.
What was the greatest skill you gained on your mission?
Time management.
What's the most spiritual experience you had?
Seeing a 10-year-old boy tell his father that he wanted him to stop smoking so that way he would not die of anything cancer related or due to tobacco use, and so that his father could be baptized so they could be an eternal family.
What was the craziest weather you experienced in Ukraine?
Big storm, strong enough winds that it blew the roof off of a bank, and we were stuck in another city because the roads were closed. And then when we got back, the main pipes had broken in the city, so we had no water for 2 weeks, and no running water for 2 weeks, and it was about -30, -40 in between there for the entire time.
What's the best piece of mission prep advice you could give someone?
Learn to love the people.
What's the thing you admire most about Ukrainians?
Their love of knowledge, and that in education is a gift.
What's the funniest language mistake you made or other mistake?
There's a 1-syllable difference between the words education and circumcision.
What's the hardest experience you had?
One day it was -35. My companion and I went out and I counted, and I think we were somewhere around 700 people that we talked to, and not a single person even stopped to talk to us. And I just look back and think nothing will be worse than that day. If I made it through that day, I can make it through anything.
My first impressions of Ukraine started as the plane was getting closer to landing in the Dnepropetrovsk airport. I had been completely exhausted because we'd been traveling so much, and so I'd fallen asleep on the plane. But then I woke up as we started the descent, and I remember looking out the window. It was in the middle of December, and so it was winter time, and everything it looked cold. There was no snow, but I saw all this farmland, and I saw these little huts and little farm areas. And I remember thinking, oh, this is a lot different than, where I am in Utah. And then the plane landed, and the airport was absolutely tiny. And I remember thinking, wait a second, this is an international airport. This is just this tiny little concrete building. And then we made it through customs, and my head was just spinning, and we met our mission president and his wife, and then we went out contacting on the street right off the plane. And that was hard because, my Russian was still very minimal, and I'm also just kind of shy, and so going up and talking to strangers was a little bit difficult. but we saw some success with contacting right then. And I remember thinking, first of all, that it was hard, but second of all, that the Lord was clearly using us, even though we were so weak and so unprepared. And I think that really set a good foundation for the rest of my mission, just being able to think back on that first day and think, okay, well, I'm a lot better prepared now than I was then, and so the Lord will be able to use me now, just like he did then. But I remember that the people were different than I was anticipating somehow. They were all very, very upset by the fact that I didn't have boots on. It was cold, it was December, and everyone would stop me and they would say, like, aren't you cold? You're going to freeze. And I remember thinking, you don't even know me and you care about me. That's really cool. And that's something that is really common in Ukrainian culture. Even if people don't know you very well, if they see you and they're worried that, you're going to be cold or you're going to get sick or something, they'll say something about it. They'll come up to you and they'll say, like, you should dress more warmly. I really like that about the culture. I think that it shows a love that the people have, and just kind of their willingness to not worry about the fact that they might not know who you are. So I thought that was a really neat aspect about the culture that I was able to see just from my first couple of hours in Ukraine. One of my other favorite traditions, and this is one that I had heard a little bit about before my mission, and that I really, really wanted to do while I was there, and the Lord kind of blessed me to be able to do it. It's the way that they celebrate Easter. And Easter is also a really, really big deal in Ukraine. The Pravoslavnaya Tserkov, the Orthodox Church there, they make a really big deal about Easter. And they have this tradition where on Easter morning, when people are walking around on the streets, anytime you see anyone, one person will say "Jesus voskres," which means Christ is risen, and then the other person will respond "Voistinu on voskres," which means truly he is risen. I had heard about that a little bit before my mission, but I knew I was only going to be in Ukraine for one Easter, and I really, really wanted to participate in that tradition because it just seemed so beautiful. But the day that it was Easter in Ukraine, one of my companions, her mission was ending, and so we were on a train going up to Dnepropetrovsk to send her home. And I remember thinking, oh no, I'll be on a train all day, I won't see anyone. But we were sitting there in our train compartment, and someone in the hallway yelled out, "Jesus voskres." And I remember thinking, is he expecting a response? And then he waited for a while, no one said anything, and then he said it again. He said, "Jesus voskres, gavaryu." Like, I say, Christ is risen. And so I called out of the train compartment, "Voistinu on voskres," and he said, "Thank you." And it was a really neat experience to see how, even though we were all on a train, even though no one was really interacting with each other, someone still really wanted to carry out that tradition and to celebrate the resurrection of the Savior. I thought that was one of the most beautiful traditions that I encountered in Ukraine. One of the traditions that Ukrainians have that's a little bit different than what we have, it's the way that they celebrate both Christmas and New Year's. For them, Christmas comes in January. It's on January 7th. And it's not as big of a deal to them as New Year's is. That's kind of from back in the Soviet era. It's kind of a tradition that has carried over from then. But so New Year's is a huge deal. And on New Year's Eve, going into New Year's Day, all the missionaries just stay in their apartments and do massive cleaning of your apartment and take care of your area book and everything. But then you'll hear fireworks and everything going on. They're huge celebrations, and it's a really good opportunity you can call all of your investigators and wish them a happy new year, and they really appreciate that because it's such a huge holiday for them. But then with Christmas, something that one of my companions and I found out by accident is they have a tradition that's kind of similar to trick-or-treating, but they do it on Christmas Eve. And so people will go around and kind of knock on each other's doors, and they'll give out candy on that day, but no one had told me that before my mission. So my companion and I made the mistake of on January 6th, which is Christmas Eve in Ukraine, we went tracting, which wasn't a good idea, because then this woman opened the door and she was carrying this huge thing of candy, and she asked us, "Oh, are you guys here as," and she said the word for kind of their trick-or-treating tradition, and we said, "No, we're missionaries for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints," and we explained a little bit, and she said, "Oh, I'm not interested at all, but here, have some candy." And so we realized then that there was a tradition that we weren't aware of, and we later talked with some of the members and found out more about it. And then we decided that that's not the best day to go tracting. You can maybe contact or teach lessons that day, but Christmas Eve is maybe not a good tracting day in Ukraine. The members in Ukraine really, really love and cherish the temple, not just the Kyiv temple, but the temple in general. And the Kyiv temple especially, because it is the one that's in their country. I served down in the far south part of Ukraine, and it took at least, in fact, I think someone said it took about 16 hours on a train to get from the Crimea up to Kyiv to attend the temple. But the members would do it because they found, I don't know, they found how important it really was. And they loved it. As soon as they would get their plans set to go to the temple, they would usually call us and say, "I'm going to the temple. I'm so excited. I'm so happy," especially if it was their first time going. And the youth really loved to go up there to do baptisms for the dead. One thing that is really amazing about Ukraine is when it was dedicated for the preaching of the gospel, President Packer, who's the one who gave the dedicatory prayer, he said that someday temples would dot the land of Ukraine. And so plural temples would dot the land, which right out of coming out of the Soviet Union, right off the bat, that must have seemed so impossible. I mean, the church was non-existent in Ukraine at all. And that was only 23 years ago. But now there's a temple in the capital city. It was voted the most beautiful religious building in Kyiv, which is really saying something because they have some beautiful Orthodox temples there as well. But it's amazing to think that there is a prophecy that the church is going to grow so much in Ukraine that there will be multiple temples there. I know that the members are working so hard for that. That's really their one goal. That's the one thing that they want, is to have temples closer to where they are so that they can go more frequently, and so that they can do the work for their ancestors, so that they can take their friends and show them what the temple is like and let them feel that spirit. But it's just amazing to think that within such a short period of time, the shortest of any country except for America with the Kirtland Temple, that Ukraine, within just 20 years, has a temple in it. It's, I think, a sign that the Lord really loves his children there, and that he wants them to have the blessings of the temple and of eternal families. I served down in the Crimean Peninsula, which is down in the southern part of Ukraine. It's surrounded by the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov up to the north. And so it was very humid, just because of being down by the seas. But it's also a little bit more mild than in some places in Ukraine as far as weather is concerned, because it is kind of a coastal area. But that being said, when everybody told me, I got to Ukraine in the middle of December and I thought, oh no, I'm going to freeze. But when I was told by my mission president I was going down to the Crimea for my area, everyone was saying, oh, you're so lucky, it will be so warm. And I thought, oh, perfect, good, this is great. And I went down there and it was freezing. And that was because that first winter was the coldest winter that Ukraine has experienced in like 25 years or something. And I remember one day my companion and I were contacting, and we met a woman from Novosibirsk, which is in Siberia in Russia, where it's supposed to be like the coldest ever. And she was telling us that it was colder where we were than it was in Novosibirsk. And I remember thinking, there's something wrong with this picture. But so it was very, very cold that year. Lots of snow, lots of ice. It's hard not to slip and fall. But then the next winter that I was in Ukraine, it was a lot more mild. It was a lot more temperate, I guess, than it had been the year before. And I remember thinking, okay, this I can handle. It's not quite as snowy. It snowed a few times while I was down there, but it mostly just rained. And it did still get quite cold, but it wasn't unbearable. We were still able to, to function without having to go inside every few minutes and kind of defrost a little bit and then go back out and keep working. In the summertime, though, it was very, very warm down in the Crimea. And that was, again, partly because we were down by the seas. And so, it's the place where people go swimming. And that's partly because it's so hot there in the summertime. And I don't know. I remember there were a few days where I thought, I don't know if I can handle walking around in this heat all this time. But there was never anything that was too bad. The Lord strengthened us to be able to keep working and keep going. We did have to bring water bottles with us so we could keep hydrated, but we were able to function just fine. We discovered that the best times for doing missionary work in terms of like street contacting or working in the parks are in the spring and in the fall, because it's warm, it's pleasant outside, but it's not too warm and it's not too cold. And so that was kind of nice when you had those really mild days and you could go outside and everyone was just in a good mood, and you would go and stop someone on the street and they'd at least be willing to listen to you for a few minutes and say, oh, well, I'm not interested, but go have a good day. And you think, oh man, everyone is so much happier now than they are when it's freezing cold or when it's really, really hot. So those are kind of the best moments, or when it's just kind of the perfect temperature. Learning Russian was kind of hard. Of course, learning any language is going to be hard, but it's not impossible, which is good to know. I remember in the MTC, I got to the point where I could understand my teachers really, really well. And I was getting better with speaking. And then when I actually got to Ukraine, you kind of had to, learn to catch up a little bit quickly because people speak so fast. And also, sometimes people will kind of interject Ukrainian into the Russian that they speak when they're actually in Ukraine. So that was a little bit hard too. There were some new words that I hadn't known. But I started to realize that really the best way to learn the language is to try to go out and actually speak. And that can be hard. That takes a lot of praying, a lot of faith, a lot of humility too, because you're going to make mistakes and people might laugh a little bit at some of the things that you say. But I was told that on your mission, you have to make this many mistakes, and that can either be 5,000 or it can be 1,000,000. It depends on however many, but you have to make that many mistakes. And you can either drag them out over the course of your whole mission, or you can get them all over with at once, and then you'll know the language a lot better. And I feel like that was really good advice. The more that I started to actually try and to actually speak, even if I didn't know for sure how to word it or how to decline things properly or how to conjugate things, the more that I just went out and tried, the better my language became, which was good because when I was only in Ukraine for about 4 months, my senior companion left, and then it was me and 2 new sister missionaries, and none of us spoke Russian very well, but we had to just get right out there and try our hardest to speak as much as we could. So if you try at the beginning to speak as much as you can, you'll be better prepared for when you actually do have to speak more. And the Lord really does bless the missionaries to learn whatever language they're learning, and I think that's especially true with Russian. He'll bless you to be able to understand the alphabet and to not be thrown off when you see Ukrainian words on the street instead of the Russian words that you study. And also, the members there are really, really helpful. They're really nice with working with brand new missionaries and saying, it's okay, like we understand. And they'll help a lot to learn how to speak. You can ask the kids especially, go up to the children and say, how do you say this? And point to something, and they'll teach you new vocabulary words. They think it's really fun. So I would say the best language learning advice would be to study diligently during language study time, be very focused, and then for the whole rest of the day, speak as much as you possibly can, and don't be afraid of making mistakes. See them as kind of fun opportunities to laugh and to joke with people, and you kind of build a relationship that way. And then also ask people for help. There's nothing wrong with asking someone for help or saying, oh, I can't remember this word. How do you say whatever? And they'll help a lot. So I served in a city called Simferopol, which is right in the middle of the Crimean Peninsula. And since my companions and I were the only sisters down there, we kind of had the responsibility to travel all throughout the Crimea to teach any women that wanted to hear more about the church. So the elders in some of the other areas, sometimes they would call us, or we would get referrals from people who lived in different cities, and then we'd hop on a bus and travel out there. But we taught this one woman that we met in Simferopol, and her name was Yasna, and she was very well prepared for the gospel, and within just a few months of when we began teaching her, she was baptized into the church. But she lived out in a tiny little village that was about an hour and a half outside of Simferopol. And her husband was not too fond of the idea that every Sunday she was leaving for a 3-hour round trip to go to church in Simferopol. And then church itself was 3 hours. And so that was 6 hours that she was gone every Sunday. And so eventually he told her that he didn't want her going to church anymore. And we were heartbroken, and she was heartbroken, and it was so hard for everyone. But around that same time, there was a man who lived in a city called Yalta, which is down at the very, very bottom part of the Crimea. And he found out about the church, and he was baptized, and his wife and his son were baptized, and he started bringing his friends into the church. And all of a sudden, down in Yalta, there was this huge, huge movement of people who were joining the church very quickly. It was a miracle to see. Well, one day, my companion and I went out to teach Yasna. We wanted to keep giving her recent convert lessons, even though her husband wasn't letting her come to church, because we wanted her to have spiritual support through that period of time. And she told us that her father-in-law, her husband's dad, had just been given a copy of the Book of Mormon by someone. And we thought, oh, well, did he meet the missionaries in Simferopol or something? How did this happen? And she said, no, he has a friend named Alexei, and he came and gave him the Book of Mormon and told him about the church. And as soon as she said his name was Alexei, I knew who it was. It was the man from Yalta who had joined the church and started the big movement out there. Turns out that he and Yasna's father-in-law had been friends for like 30 years. And because of that, Yasna's husband was willing to let her start attending church down in Yalta. And so we were able to go with her for the second ever church meeting that was held in Yalta. And that was a miracle to see all these recent converts who were starting a little group, which is one step smaller than a branch. And it was amazing to see how the Lord had really prepared Yasna's family, because Yasna was so readily accepted the gospel. And then her father-in-law's best friend for years accepted it, and that started to soften the hearts of the rest of her family. And before I left, we were able to teach her mother-in-law and her brother-in-law, and her husband still wasn't terribly interested, but even he was starting to warm up to it a little bit. And then I left, I came home. But it was such a miracle to see not only how the church was growing so rapidly down in Yalta and in these tiny little villages that were around, but also to see how the Lord had connected people in such a way that they would be able to have support in the church and kind of have that fellowship that's so central to the purpose of the church, when people get to meet together and to commune with each other and kind of support and strengthen and fellowship each other. I really liked Ukrainian food in general. There are differences between Ukrainian food and American food, but I can't really articulate them, I don't think. The bread there is really good. It's kind of a little bit more like crusty than our bread here, but it's very delicious. Also, they make borscht, which is a beet soup, and that's really good too. That was the first thing that I ate in Ukraine. And I remember thinking, I was a little wary at first because it's bright pink. And I remember thinking, oh, I've never eaten bright pink soup before. But it was really good. It was delicious. And they put a lot of smetana, which is sour cream, and they put that in their soups and in a lot of the different things that they eat. They eat a lot more mayonnaise than we do here. So sometimes they would even use mayonnaise as a sauce on pizza or things like that. So that was something that was a surprise to me. They eat a lot of vegetables, a lot of fruits, and they'll also, I don't know, they eat a lot of these things called pierogi or varyaniki, or just little kind of not baked all the time, but baked or fried goods. Pierogi are kind of little pastries that have filling on the inside, kind of like little pies, and they're good. They have a lot of cabbage and potatoes in them. And also the varyaniki and things, those are kind of little dumplings that you can boil, and those are pretty good as well. Again, they eat them with a lot of smetana, so I got used to sour cream pretty quickly. As far as the cities and kind of the way that people just live in Ukraine, the cities are a little bit different than they are here, especially if you're in Utah. I mean, the streets are all very broad and very straight and things like that, whereas in Ukraine they're winding and they're really kind of older and they're very, very narrow, and the traffic there, very few people have cars, and so I have no idea why there are so many cars on the street, because it always seemed like the streets were just packed with cars. But I knew very few people who actually had a car, so I don't know where all the other cars were coming from. But then in the cities, there are a lot of huge apartment buildings, just tons of really tall, big apartment complexes. They're usually made out of some sort of concrete, and just very, very big. There are also a lot of older, kind of more European style looking buildings, some that were built in the 1800s and the 1700s, and it's really cool to kind of see that and to think, oh my goodness, this has been around as long as my country has existed, and it's kind of cool. It's neat to get that sense of history. The people there, like I said, very few of them have cars, and so they'll usually either walk or they'll take public transportation. They have a really good public transportation system. They have these things called marshrutkhi, which are kind of like buses, but a little bit different, kind of a little smaller. That's probably the primary form of public transportation, and you can get a marshrutka that takes you anywhere in the city, generally, if you know where it's going. They'll have signs in the window that tell you the different stops that they'll go to. And they also have trolley buses, which just kind of run up and down the streets on their little electric wires. And so you'll see a lot of people who will be walking around or taking those. The people there, they dress a lot more nicely than we do here in America, in the sense of it's rare to see people who would go outside in just like a t-shirt and jeans and then just like tennis shoes or something. They'll usually wear nicer shoes, and they'll take good care of their shoes. It's a really big deal to polish your shoes in Ukraine. It's a really big deal. And so I would definitely say for missionaries who are going there to make sure that they keep their shoes polished. But also, you know, if you're going to go do a service project or something like that, you might feel a little bit out of place because you'll be walking around just like in your t-shirt and maybe jeans and your tennis shoes or something. And you'll look around and you'll notice that everybody else looks a lot more put together than you do. But it's kind of cool that they consider it kind of an act of respect to the people that they'll be seeing outside. So even just to go to the grocery store or something like that, people will tend to dress up for that, and you'll see people walking around in suits or things all the time, just kind of to show some respect. I thought that was an interesting part of the culture. Also, because they do walk around so much, the streets almost always have people on them. So that's good for missionary purposes. You can contact the people who are there, and you'll for sure find some people. But you'll also learn that there are certain areas that are too busy for contacting. If you stop, then people will bump into you. And you'll find that there are some places where there are very few people walking around. So you kind of learn how to tell the places that have a lot of people walking there, but not necessarily too many. And those are usually like the parks and things like that. Those are usually the better areas for missionary work for contacting purposes. As far as the history of Ukraine goes, they have had a really rich history and also a really hard history in a lot of different ways, especially in more recent years. They have such a rich cultural history with great authors and great musicians and artists, and they have a lot of beautiful art and things like that. They have a really strong tradition in the Orthodox Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church. And a lot of people there are, even if they themselves don't necessarily believe in God, they will claim themselves as members of the Orthodox Church just because that's such a huge part of their tradition, part of their national identity. And then in more recent years, after the communist revolution in Russia, which at the time Ukraine was a part of Russia, there were a lot of different things that happened with the economy and things like that were really hard on poor little Ukraine. During World War II, excuse me, there were several battles that were fought in Ukraine. I served in the Crimean Peninsula, which is down in the very southern part, and all over the place you'll see things for people trying to remember what happened during World War II, just because it was such a hard period of time. Even before that, though, they had been going through a rough period with the communists in Russia. When Stalin enforced a famine in Ukraine, he essentially starved the people in the 1930s because they refused to work with his collectivized farms and things like that. So they went straight from that into World War II and having battles fought on their soil. And then after the end of World War II, they were still part of the Soviet Union, and that was really hard for the economy and also just for the people in general. The Orthodox Church was persecuted mercilessly by the communist regime, and a lot of priests were killed and arrested and would just disappear. But something that I noticed because of all that, because of how hard things have been in recent decades, is that the people are very resilient. And also, I was really impressed by how faithful they still were. A lot of people that you meet who grew up during the Soviet era, they'll tell about how their babushki and their little grandmothers would go and sneak Bibles to them, and they would tell them stories from the gospel of Christ. And it was just impressive to me to think that even though it was so dangerous and even though everything was so hard, people were really trying to keep their faith and to keep that, that hope that comes through the gospel. And because of that, that's really the reason that there is still a belief in God in Ukraine. You'd think with all these bad things happening that people would be more tempted to just kind of throw up their hands and say, if there is a God, why does he allow these things to happen? But instead, the people have taken that to be, God got us through this and he's going to get us through the hard times we're in right now. And there's a really deep spiritual strength with the people there. Not with everyone, of course. There are still individuals who kind of maintain the Soviet perspective of atheism. But I'd say the majority of people have some sort of belief in God that has carried through all of the hardships that they've been through. Also because of the Ukrainian people being able to keep some semblance of faith throughout all of that, that made it easier for the church to come into Ukraine in 1990 when they were able, right after the fall of the Soviet Union, and they were able to come and send representatives and dedicate the land of Ukraine for the preaching of the gospel. If people there, if the Ukrainian people had not kept their faith, then I don't think that it would have come about that easily. I don't think that it would have been so quick right after the fall of the Soviet Union that the church would be welcomed into Ukraine. So I think it's not only a tender mercy, but a miracle in general that throughout all the hardships, people still believed in God and were still willing to find ways to show their belief in him. The Ukrainian people are very deeply feeling people, which means that if they love you, they will really, really deeply love you. And you'll see that a lot. especially as missionaries. I feel like there are so many people who they really love the missionaries for the fact that either because they're members of the church and they really admire the work that you're doing, or a lot of the babushki, the older people there, they really admire the fact that there are youth who believe in God so much that they would leave their homes and their families and stop school and come to Ukraine for a year and a half or 2 years just for the sole purpose of teaching the gospel. And they really deeply and strongly love the missionaries for that. And I feel like one of the best ways to connect then with these people who have these really deeply rooted feelings is to be very open with them and to show your love for them too. Ukrainians don't necessarily express their love directly. They're a lot less willing, or not willing, a lot less open, I guess, than Americans are in terms of saying I love you or things like that. But if the missionaries say it to them, then it might take them aback at first, but usually they'll say it to you too, and they'll say, I love you too. And so, be open in expressing your love with the people. Also, something that I think is more important than almost anything else with missionary work in Ukraine is to show your love and support to the members of the church. I had the blessing of only being in one area for my whole mission. And so I got to know the members in that area really, really well. 15 months in one city. And I remember at first being a little bit intimidated by them, thinking, oh my goodness, they speak so fast and there's no way that I can really get to know them. But because I had the desire to love them and to serve them, I think that the Lord blessed me with opportunities to find ways that I could do that, even without necessarily being able to speak very well. And I think that really changed my life and also my mission. Just being willing to be open and showing my love for the members. And that strengthens their testimonies. It helps them feel like they are needed in the church. It helps them feel like God has a purpose for them. And then they're more willing to introduce their friends to you so that you can begin to teach their friends the gospel. It's because they trust you and they see that you're sincere in your testimony and in your willingness to serve and to bless people. So I think that more than anything else, missionaries really need to show their love for the members there and really need to be willing to open themselves up and express that love and say, we're doing this because we love you and because God loves you and you're important in his eyes. He wants you to come home to him. And as you do that, you'll see that the people will really feel that will become the feeling that they have deep in their souls. That will become the reason for the things that they do. They'll think about that and they'll remember that, and it will become very important to them. With companions, first of all, I feel blessed to have been given, I think, the best companions of anyone. I had relatively few companions because I was never transferred, and so I just stayed there for a long time, and my companions were generally in the area for quite a while too. But something that I learned pretty quickly was that in the White Handbook of Missionary Instructions, it talks about how your line of responsibility is first, your primary responsibility is to God, your second one is to your mission president, and your third one is to your companion. And I caught myself a few times thinking more about my investigators and our contacts than about my companions. And I feel like although you should be thinking all the time about your investigators and the people that you're working with, your companion is even more important than they are, which is something that I wasn't expecting when I first went on my mission. You expect to go out and to teach people, but sometimes you forget that the most important person is the one that you live with and the one that you work with 24/7. So I really feel like the way to have a successful companionship is to care even more about your companion than you do about your investigators, which is hard sometimes to keep that in mind, because when you're doing planning sessions, it's always focused on your investigators, and you pray for your investigators and everything. But you should be setting goals and making plans to serve your companion, and you should be open in expressing your love to your companion and saying, how can I help you? Or if he or she is going through a rough period of time, you have to be willing to kind of support them through that, and to give that priority to even the things that your investigators are going through. Like I said, I was blessed with really, really amazing companions, and we're still friends. You know, we'll still talk with each other. One lives all the way in England, so she and I will Skype or, you know, send Facebook messages or something. And that's because your companions really should become your best friends on your mission, even more than the members, even more than the investigators that you meet. The Lord sent you on your mission to your specific area with your specific companion so that the two of you or the three of you can learn from each other and can learn to serve each other. And I think that was one of the biggest blessings that I received on my mission, was the relationships I built with my companions. One thing that was a little bit hard for me at the beginning of my mission was contacting, just because I'm kind of shy. I don't usually like to go out and just like interrupt people and, you know, stop them on the streets, and that was hard. And I remember in my first transfer, I was really struggling with, I knew that our message was important. I knew it was something that people needed to hear. And I felt so bad and so prideful for having this feeling of kind of hesitance and not wanting to go and talk to people. And so I prayed a lot about that. And I really wanted to know how I could overcome this. And I remember one day in particular, my two companions and I were out contacting rather. And I was just really struggling that day. I was really sad. I felt like I was kind of a useless missionary and that I wasn't doing God's will because I wasn't talking with as many people as I could. And so I prayed for his help, for God's help. And right after I finished saying that prayer, I looked up and I saw a woman quite a ways down the street. And I remember thinking, okay, I'll show some faith. I'll go and talk to her. So I went up to her, and I was so nervous, and my Russian was still really poor because it was my first transfer. And I showed her the Book of Mormon, and I said, have you ever heard of the Book of Mormon? And she looked at it for a second, and she said, oh, it's about Jesus Christ. And I said, yeah, and I testified a little bit about Jesus Christ and about kind of his role as our Savior. And I asked her if she had ever read the Bible. And she said that she hadn't because she was Muslim. There were a lot of Muslims down in the area that I served in. And then one of my senior companions started talking with her, and they carried on a conversation. And somehow the conversation turned to the topic of prayer. And I remember my companion testifying that we know that God hears and answers our prayers. And as soon as she said that, the woman began sobbing. And I remember thinking, what's going on? This doesn't normally happen. And the woman told us that she had just lost her son, and that she had been going through some problems with work and with her family, and that she had been praying so hard to feel some sense of comfort and relief from the pain that she was going through. And then that very day, we showed up and we told her that God hears and answers her prayers. And she said that was a miracle, and she thanked us for it very sincerely, and she walked away. And I remember that was really a turning point for me, when I realized that missionary work isn't just about, it's not just about contacting so that you can say, okay, we got some contacts, now we have new investigators, now we can teach people. But the Lord literally gives his children opportunities to answer prayers. That was a miracle that I saw, because we didn't get her contact information. She didn't accept a copy of the Book of Mormon or anything, but we saw that the Lord had used us as instruments in his hand to answer her prayers, that she had been desperately praying for comfort and for strength. And from that point on, it was still hard. It was still, difficult to get out of my comfort zone and talk to people. But contacting had a new meaning for me. It wasn't about just talking with people about the church. It was going out to answer people's prayers, to be a mouthpiece for God, or at least to try to do that. And because of that, we saw a number of other instances when the Lord would place us in a position to bless someone's life and to be the answer to the prayers that they had been praying. One of my favorite mission experiences happened not too long before I came home from my mission. My companion and I had just been out tracting, and it was time to come home for the evening. So we left, and it was wintertime, so it got really dark at night. And whenever it was dark outside and we were walking, we would always, walk really quickly and be very careful of our surroundings just for safety reasons. And we were walking this area that was kind of deserted, sort of. There was a little park area and there wasn't anyone out. And we were always kind of especially careful in those situations, just, to be safe. So we were walking really fast. And then suddenly we heard someone running from behind us, and we thought, oh no, this could be bad. But then we heard him yell out, "Sisters, sisters!" And we thought, wait, this must be someone who knows us. But we were a little surprised because it was so dark, and we wondered how he could have seen our name tags and known that we were sister missionaries. And we turned around expecting it to be maybe one of the members or one of our investigators or someone we knew from English practice or something. But it was a man that neither of us had ever seen. And by this time, I had been in the city for about 13 months or so. And so I knew pretty much everyone that you could know in Simferopol. But I had no idea who this man was. And he came up to us and he started talking with us, and he said, "I know that you're missionaries for the LDS Church. Is there a program in your church where you send people to teach families?" And we said, "Yes." That's what we do. That's what we do as missionaries. And he said, "Okay, well, great. I want you to come teach my family. I have a wife and 4 daughters," which for a Ukrainian family, that's a big family. They usually have 1 or 2 children. And so the fact that he had 4 kids, that really impressed us. And it's kind of a long story about how we were able to actually find where he lived and set up a time to meet and everything. But when we were able to finally go to his house, his name was Valieri, he let us in and sat us down, and we met his wife and his daughters, and they were wonderful. And then he said, "I want to show you some pictures." And so he took this photo album and he put it in front of us and opened it. And the very first picture there was a picture of him standing by the Kiev temple. And we thought, wait a second, how do you know about this? And it turns out that he had used to work for the government as the Minister of Religious Affairs. And he had helped get the church into Ukraine, and he had helped get the permission and everything for building the Kiev temple. And so they invited him to go to the open house, and he went, and he told us that he had felt something while he was in the Kiev temple that was just kind of an overwhelming feeling to him. And it made him want to know a little bit more. So we began working with him and his family a little bit. And it turns out that he knew several of the members. He knew the current branch president, and he knew someone who had been the branch president before. And so we had members that we could invite to come to the lessons and to help strengthen him. And I left before, we could see how they were progressing. But it was such a miracle to see how the Lord had placed us in that tiny little park area in the middle of the winter time when it was dark outside, and we were just coming home from a long day of tracting and contacting. And we were able to meet someone who was really prepared to learn more about the gospel. It was amazing to see how the Lord had given him experiences throughout his life. He had helped him to encounter the church before, to have a really good feeling about the church, and then to get to go to the temple open house and feel the Spirit there. And I'm convinced that someday he and his entire family will join the church, mostly because I don't think that the Lord would give him so many experiences with it for no reason at all. I know that the Lord does prepare people to find out about the gospel. And I know that through that preparation, he is preparing those families to be sealed for eternity. That's the thing that I'm the most excited about for the Petrov family in Simferopol, is the day that they can go back to the Kiev temple and be sealed there. First of all, congratulations on receiving your mission call. That's really exciting, and I'm especially excited that you were called to serve in Ukraine. It's the best place, and the Ukraine Dnepropetrovsk Mission is the best mission in the entire world. I know that everyone says that, and for everyone it's true. And for you, the Ukraine Dnepropetrovsk Mission is going to be the best place that you could be. something that you can start doing right now in order to prepare to go to Ukraine is to learn as much as you can before you enter the MTC about the history of the Ukrainian people. Learn about their culture, learn about their traditions, learn about the things that they've been through, because that will help you to be able to empathize with them and to be able to understand where they're coming through when they talk with you. That's something you can just do, just spend a little bit of time on Google and kind of look up a couple of things and learn as much as you can. Also, if you haven't done so already, make the decision right now to love the people of Ukraine. Start praying right now for your future investigators. Start praying right now for the members in the areas that you'll serve in. And make the conscious decision to love the people. That way, by the time that you get to Ukraine, it won't be an issue of you're going through culture shock. You won't have any of the thoughts of, oh, this is so different. I'm not sure if I like this, because you'll know that this is where God wants you to be, and that these are his precious children and he loves them so much. I remember one of my first weekends in Ukraine, we were having a branch party. And I remember I was standing in the kitchen of our branch and I was spreading liver on these little slices of bread. And I remember thinking, oh, this is not what I was expecting my mission to be like. I didn't think I would be standing in one place for an hour just, getting ready for a branch activity. This isn't missionary work. I should be out contacting or teaching a lesson or something. But then I looked around me and I saw that there were all these women from the branch who were preparing as hard as they could to make this activity a good activity, and they were really stressed out. And all of a sudden it occurred to me that I was serving the members of the branch, and I was filled with this sense of love for them. And I began to realize that God saw them, they were his daughters, and he loved them, and he wanted them to be happy. He wanted them to know that he cared about them and was aware of them. And even though I was just standing there in a little corner spreading liver on some bread, I realized that I was helping him to show his love for them by showing my love for them. So if you make the decision right now that you are going to love the people with your whole heart, and that no matter what comes, you are going to find all that is good and all that is lovely and all the things that are in the 13th article of faith, you're going to find those things in Ukraine and with the people there, then you will be an even more powerful instrument in God's hands, because the Lord works through love. And if you love the people, then he will lead you to the people that he is prepared to accept the gospel.